"Phew!" said Margalo when they were high in the air. "You smell awful, Stuart." "I know I do," he replied gloomily. "I hope it isn't making you feel bad." "I can hardly breathe," she answered, "and my heart is pounding in my breast. Isn't there something you could drop to make yourself lighter?" "Well, I could drop these ice skates," said Stuart. "Goodness me!" the little bird cried. "I didn't know you had skates hiding in your shirt. Toss those heavy skates away quickly, or we will both come down in the ocean and perish." Stuart threw his skates away and watched them fall down, down, till they disappeared in the gray waves below. "That's better," said Margalo. "Now we're all right. I can already see the towers and chimneys of New York." 15 minutes later, in they flew through the open window of the Littles' living room, and landed on the Boston Fern. Mrs. Little, who had left the window up when she Mrs. Margalo, was glad to see them back, for she was beginning to worry. When she heard what had happened, and how near she had come to losing her son, she took Stuart in her hand, even though his clothes smelled nasty, and kissed him. Then she sent him upstairs to take a bath, and sent George out to take Stuart's clothes to the cleaner. "What was it like out there in the Atlantic Ocean?" inquired Mr. Little, who had never been very far from home. So Stuart and Margalo told all about the ocean, and the gray waves curling with white crests, and the gulls in the sky, and the channel buoys, and the ships, and the tugs, and the wind making a sound in your ears. Mr. Little sighed, and said some day he hoped to get away from business long enough to see all those fine things. Everyone thanked Margalo for saving Stuart's life, and at supper time Mrs. Little presented her with a tiny cake that had seeds sprinkled on top. Chapter 10. Springtime. Snowbell the cat enjoyed nighttime more than daytime. Perhaps it was because his eyes liked the dark, but I think it was because there are always so many worthwhile things going on in New York at night. Snowbell had several friends in the neighborhood. Some of them were house cats, others were store cats. He knew a Maltese cat in the A&P, a white Persian in the apartment house next door, a tortoiseshell in the delicatessen, a tiger cat in the basement of the branch library, and a beautiful young Angora who had escaped from a cage in a pet shop on Third Avenue and had gone to live a free life in her own in the tool house of the small park near Stuart's house. One fine spring evening Snowbell had been calling on the Angora in the park. He started home late, and it was such a lovely night she said she would walk along with him to keep him company. When they got to Mr. Little's house, the two cats sat down on the foot of a tall vine which ran up the side of the house past George's bedroom. This vine was useful to Snowbell because he could climb it at night and crawl into the house through George's open window. Snowbell began telling his friend about Margalo and Stuart. "Goodness," said the Angora cat, "you mean to say you live in the same house with a bird and a mouse, and you don't do anything about it?" "That's the situation," replied Snowbell, "but what can I do about it? Please remember that Stuart is a member of the family, and the bird is a permanent guest, like myself." "Well," said Snowbell's friend, "all I can say is you've got more self-control than I have." "Doubtless," said Snowbell. "However, I sometimes think I've got too much self-control for my own good. I've been terribly nervous and upset lately, and I think it's because I'm always holding myself in." The cats' voices grew louder, and they talked so loudly that they never heard a slight rustling in the vine a few feet above their heads. It was a gray pigeon who had been asleep there, and who was awake at the sound of the cats and began to listen. "This sounds like an interesting conversation," said the pigeon to himself. "Maybe I'd better stay around and see if I can learn something." "Look here," he heard the Angora cat say to Snowbell, "I admit that a cat has a duty towards her own people, and that under the circumstances it would be wrong for you to eat Margalo, but I'm not a member of your family, and there's nothing to stop me from eating her, is there?" "Nothing that I can think of offhand," said Snowbell. "Then here I go," said the Angora, starting up the vine. The pigeon was wide awake at this time, ready to fly away, but the voices down below continued. "Wait a minute," said Snowbell. "Don't be in such a hurry. I don't think you better go in there tonight." Why not? Asked the other cat. Well, for one thing, you're not supposed to enter our house. It's unlawful entry, and you might get into trouble. I won't get into any trouble, said the Angora. Please wait till tomorrow night, said Snowbell firmly. Mr. and Mrs. Little will be going out tomorrow night, and you won't be taking such a risk. It's for your own good I'm suggesting this. Oh, all right, agreed Angora. I guess I can wait, but tell me where I'll find the bird after I do get in. That's simple, said Snowbell. Climb this vine, enter George's room through the open window, then go downstairs and you'll find the bird asleep in the Boston fern on the bookcase. Easy enough, said the Angora, licking her chops. I'm obliged to you, sir. Well, the old thing, whispered the pigeon to himself, and he flew away quickly to find a piece of writing paper and a pencil. Snowbell said good night to his friend and climbed up the vine and went into bed. Next morning Margalo found a note on the branch of her fern when she woke up. It said, Beware of a stray cat who will come by night. It was signed a well-wisher. She kept the note under her wing all day long, wondering what she had better do, but she didn't dare show it to anyone, not even to Stuart. She couldn't eat. She was so frightened. What had I better do? She kept saying to herself. Finally, just before dark, she hopped up to an open window without saying anything to anyone, and she flew away. It was springtime, and she flew north just as fast as she could, because something inside her told her that north was the way for a bird to go when springtime came to the land. Chapter 11, The Automobile. For 3 days everybody hunted all over the house for Margalo without finding so much as a feather. I guess she had spring fever, said George. A normal bird doesn't stay indoors this kind of weather. Perhaps she has a husband somewhere and has gone to meet him, suggested Mr. Little. She has not, sobbed Stuart bitterly. That's just a lot of nonsense. How do you know? Asked George. Because I asked her one time, cried Stuart. She told me she was a single bird. Everyone questioned Snowbell closely, but the cat insisted he knew nothing about Margalo's disappearance. I don't see why you have to make a para pariah out of me just because that disagreeable little chippy flew the coop, said Snowbell irritably. Stuart was heartbroken. He had no appetite, refused food, and lost weight. Finally, he decided that he would run away from home without telling anyone and go out into the world and look for Margalo. While I am about it, I might as well seek my fortune too, he thought. Before daybreak next morning, he got out his biggest handkerchief, and in it he placed his toothbrush, his money, his soap, his comb and brush, a clean suit of underwear, and his pocket compass. I ought to take along something to remember my mother by, he thought. So he crept into her mother's room when she was still asleep, climbed the little lamp cord to her bureau, and pulled the strand of Mrs. Little's hair from her comb. He rolled the hair up neatly and laid it in the handkerchief with the other things. Then he rolled everything up into a bundle and tied it onto one end of a wooden match. With his gray felt hat cocked jauntily to one side of his head and his pack slung across his shoulders, Stuart stole softly out of the house. Goodbye, beautiful home, he whispered. I wonder if I will ever see you again. Stuart stood uncertain for a moment in the street in front of the house. The world was such a big place in which to go looking for a lost bird. North, south, east, or west? Which way should he go? Stuart decided that he needed advice on such an important matter, so he started uptown to find his friend Dr. Carey, the surgeon-dentist, owner of the Sooner Wasp. The doctor was glad to see Stuart. He took him right into his inner office when he was busy pulling a man's tooth. The man's name was Edward Clydesdale, and he had several wads of gauze in his cheek to hold his mouth open good and wide. The tooth was a hard one to get out, and the doctor let Stuart sit on his instrument tray as he could talk during the operation. This is my friend Stuart Little, he said to the man with the gauze in his cheek. Oh, sir, replied the man as best he could. Very well, thank you, replied Stuart. Well, what's on your mind, Stuart? Asked Dr. Carey, seizing hold of the man's tooth with a pair of pincers and giving a strong pull. I ran away from home this morning, exclaimed Stuart. I am going out into the world to seek my fortune and to look for a lost bird. Which direction do you think I could start out in? Dr. Carey twisted the tooth a bit and racked it back and forth. What color is the bird? He asked. Brown, said Stuart. Better go north, said Dr. Carey. Don't you think so, Mr. Clydesdale? Said Mr. Clydesdale. What? Cried Stuart. Are you okay, Central Arc? Said Mr. Clydesdale. He says look in Central Park, explained Dr. Carey, tucking another big wad of gauze into Mr. Clydesdale's cheek. And it's a good suggestion. Oftentimes, people with decayed teeth have sound ideas. Central Park is a favorite place for birds in the spring. Mr. Clydesdale was nodding his head vigorously and seemed about to speak again. If okay, a erd in Central Arc or a arc oven and Artford Railway in ook in Connecticut. What? Cried Stuart, delighted at this new kind of talk. What, said Mr. Clydesdale? If aren't a earn in Central Arc a orc you all and Artford all way in ook in Connecticut. He says if you can't locate the bird in Central Park, take a New York, New Haven, and Newford Railroad train and look in Connecticut, said Dr. Gray. Then he removed the rolls of gauze from Dr. Clydesdale's mouth. Rinse, please, he said. Mr. Clydesdale took a glass of mouthwash that was beside the chair and rinsed his mouth. Tell me this, Stuart, said Dr. Carey. How are you traveling? On foot? Yes, sir, said Stuart. Well, I think you better have a car. As soon as I get this tooth out, we'll see what can be done about it. Open, please, Mr. Clydesdale. Dr. Carey grabbed the tooth with the pincers again, and this time he pulled so long and so hard and with such determination that the tooth popped out, which was a great relief to everybody, particularly to Mr. Clydesdale. The doctor had led Stuart into another room. From a shelf he took a tiny automobile about 6 inches long, the most perfect miniature automobile Stuart had ever seen. It was a bright yellow with black fenders, a streamlined car of graceful design. I made this myself, Dr. Carey said. I enjoy building model cars and boats, and other things when I'm not extracting teeth. This car has a real gasoline motor in it. It has quite a good deal of power. Do you think you can handle it, Stuart? Certainly, replied Stuart, looking into the driver's seat and blowing the horn. But isn't it going to attract too much attention? Won't everybody stop and stare at such a small automobile? They would if they could see you, replied Dr. Carey, but nobody will be able to see you or the car. Why not? Asked Stuart. Because this automobile is a thoroughly modern car. It's not only noiseless, it's invisible. Nobody can see it. I can see it, remarked Stuart. Push that little button, said the doctor, pointing to a button on the instrument panel. Stuart pushed the button. Instantly, the car vanished from sight. Now push it again, said the doctor. How can I push it when I can't see it? Said Stuart. Feel around for it. So Stuart felt around until his hand came in contact with the button. It seemed like the same button, and Stuart pushed it. He heard the slight grinding noise and felt something slip out from under his hand. Hey, watch out! Cried Dr. Carey. You pushed the start button. She's off! There she goes! She's away! She's loose in the room! Now we'll never catch her. He grabbed Stuart up and placed him on the table where he wouldn't be hit by a runaway car. Oh, mercy, cried Stuart when he realized what he had done. It was a very awkward situation. Neither Dr. Carey nor Stuart could see the little automobile, yet it was rushing all over the room under its own power, bumping into things. First there came a crashing noise over by the fireplace. The hearth broom fell down. Dr. Carey leaped for the spot and pounced on the place where the sound had come from. But though he was quick, he had hardly got his hands on the place when there was another crash over by the wastebasket. The doctor pounced again. Pounce, crash, pounce, crash. The doctor was racing all over the room, pouncing and missing. It was almost impossible to catch a speedy, invisible model automobile, even one as a skillful dentist.